Rebecca, it's so good to have you on our 3-episode series. And today, for the first episode, we're talking about overcoming imposter syndrome to build your confidence. So to start off with, can you give us a little bit of understanding the definition of imposter syndrome?
Sure, I'd love to. So I think essentially the thing to note about imposter syndrome is it's a very kind of common human trait. It's not sort of something that just occurs with a few people. It's a very common thing. It happens with lots of people. And it's this concept where you sort of feel like you're less than, you're somehow less worthy or not as good as somebody else at something. You're basically not performing as well as somebody else. And there's this fear that you might be found out, that at some point somebody's going to recognize you're not actually as qualified as you think you are or as they thought you were. That's a very common way in which it comes up. And at some point you're going to kind of lose your job because you're not actually as gifted as perhaps you thought you were, or the people who've hired you thought you were. So I think the thing that's really interesting about imposter syndrome is it kind of comes up all the time. I don't know if you're familiar with Michelle Obama, but Michelle Obama is a really, really vocal advocate of talking about imposter syndrome. She talks herself repeatedly about not feeling good enough and having felt like that for many, many years throughout her life. Even as First Lady of the United States, she felt that way, which is kind of really fascinating. Another really good example that you might be familiar with is Natalie Portman, who is a very well-known actress. But Natalie Portman got into Harvard University, and she was concerned that she might be perceived as only getting into Harvard because, she was a famous actress and, everybody would know who she was, when actually she was incredibly intelligent and very gifted and really had earned her place to be there. That's a kind of classic example of imposter syndrome.
Why do people put themselves through that? Why does that happen to the most, accomplished people?
That's such a good question. I think it boils down to this very, very deep value that we have. I call them magma values because they're very emotional values. They sit really kind of deep in our guts, and they're things that we really need. And when those values are met, then that's when we feel more comfortable and more happy. And the value around imposter syndrome is really this fear of not being accepted. You really want to be accepted by these people, whether it's your boss or whether it's society or whether it's your friends, whatever it might be. But it really boils down to this sort of innate fear of not being accepted, not belonging. And it can also come from this kind of concept of failure, fearing failure somehow. And nobody really ever wants to fail. So we kind of assume that, we're going to end up in this kind of negative space. And I think it's connected to this concept that we're kind of lacking. So you spend this very kind of human trait to kind of compare yourself so that you can judge where you fit in based on the other people around you. So you kind of work out, do I fit in here? Am I kind of excelling here? Am I kind of underscoring here? And we sort of assess where our own standing is based on everybody else. And often what happens with that is you arrive at this conclusion, it's kind of a faulty conclusion, an assumption that you are somehow lacking compared to everybody else. You are somehow less than, you are somehow not good enough, you are somehow not smart enough. And it's a protectionism, really. I mean, that's really where it comes from. It's kind of this just protectionism, which is ultimately fear.
How would those, how would our community and professional working people get to a place where they feel that they are good enough?
Well, I think that's the big age-old question. I think the reality is, over the years, I've been working now for 10 years in the professional development industry, and over the years I have seen there are so many recurring limiting beliefs that come up for people around how they're perceived, how they believe they're perceived, whether or not they're good enough. And often it comes down to that concept of being good enough. You can take all these sort of limiting beliefs that people have, and often it will come down to that one kind of feeling. And it's a worth question. It's like, am I worthy of being here? Do I add enough value? Am I kind of a valuable, member of the team? And that all comes down to this concept of worth. And I found that in my world, we can spend a lot of time learning skills, skills to be a better communicator, skills to be a better leader, skills to be, a more effective negotiator. But the reality is if you don't actually look at that concept of worth and that concept of self-esteem first, none of those skills actually rub off. None of those skills actually stick because you're constantly doubting whether you can even do the skill. So I've worked with women before who, have gone through all these sort of leadership programs, but actually still struggle with confidence, still have issues at that basic level of esteem because that has never been looked at. And that is the fundamental aspect of any personal development, any professional development. And unfortunately, I think it's a really underutilized area of professional development. I think it should be much more kind of a consistent theme in trainings that happen in companies.
I find it so fascinating because I feel that, when I look at children, let's say under the age of 5, they are like daredevils. They have got no qualms drawing your walls, no qualms taking the leap from the sofa into wherever they end up being, and suddenly the minute it seems like when we start school and we start to learn what's right, what is incorrect, maybe that's where we get lost in translation perhaps, because I find it so fascinating that as we grow older, perhaps our capacity and appetite for fear affects our confidence, that perhaps leads to imposter syndrome, because we want to be our best, but we still think that we are not good enough.
Yes, I think that's a very, very important point. And I think you're right, because up until sort of age 7, we don't really have a kind of a sense of critique. So around age 7, your brain will change and you suddenly have this ability to challenge what you're learning and to challenge what's going on. You become, your critical thinking sort of starts. So up until then, you don't feel that sense of judgment. You might feel a bit uncomfortable if somebody's mean to you as a kid, but you don't feel judged. And I think that's the issue with imposter syndrome, is absolutely a fear of judgment, which basically means it kind of equates to that kind of lack of acceptance. I don't belong here. But I think little kids don't feel that because A, they're not critiquing it in the same way as we do as adults. And B, because they kind of just don't sort of feel like it personalized, like a personalized attack on them. They don't feel like it's, they don't compare, actually. They don't look at the other child and sort of compare like we do as adults. That's something that definitely develops as we age. And we start looking externally for our source of reference rather than just going, I'm okay. Because kids are very egocentric, right? I mean, it's all very much about me. I know I've got a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it's very much about me, and what do I need as the child? And they don't sort of think about, they haven't developed that critical faculty yet to think about the people around them. But I think we've become so obsessed with it. And it's exacerbated in the new media age, isn't it? With social media particularly, it can be really damaging for mental health, I think, social media. You've got to be very careful how you use social media.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that, the aimless flicking through social media is part of the most damaging part of that. I think when you go on social media, I really think you should be very purposeful about how you use it. You go on there to do something and then come out of it again. Because A, it's a time waster, but B, you end up in that space where you end up comparing and then you become more critical about yourself. As a result, you get that concept of lack. I'm lacking somehow compared to everybody else.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you say, because over the past few days, for me, I tend to have, I try to have a topic of learning from week to week. And so last week was what I call Dragon's Den, where I started watching episodes, on social media on Dragon's Den, where I see how entrepreneurs pitch for funding or whatever it is. I find that what I found was that I think at the end of my second session, because I only allocate about 20 minutes per day to go through the episodes, what I found that after the second day, I felt a bit of a loss in confidence, because I feel that, oh my God, these people are so amazing. And, how will my business ever be equivalent or be worthy of that? And then on day 3, when I sort of woke up and I went for a good run and I had a good breakfast and I allocate time to just switch off from work, suddenly the coin dropped when I said, you know what, I'm actually not that kind of entrepreneur. Why am I comparing myself with them? And so that crave for admiration unconsciously dragged me into the mud of doubt, where the previous week I was highly confident. So that is so insightful. I know as a coach, you work with many professionals on building confidence. So give us some key points about what we can learn and what we can do to build that confidence away from imposter syndrome.
I think your point, particularly out there, is very important about not comparing apples and pears, because you're not the same as somebody else. You don't have the same value system as somebody else, which means you don't value the same things. You don't see the same things as important necessarily. So the goals that they have for their values that's their path. And people are always sort of talking about staying in your own lane. That's basically what that is. It's about understanding what you want, firstly, and how you're matching up to your own measure. And I think that's so fundamental to know that, this is actually what I want. I'm not that person. So You need to kind of look at the apples, compare yourself with another apple and see how you fit, if you have to compare at all. But yeah, I think some tips are useful as to how we can actually manage it more effectively. So how I look at imposter syndrome is sort of a 3-step process. The first is all about time. So the first step is really about understanding past. The second step is the present. And then the third is obviously the future. So let me explain them a little bit more. So for the past, the key with this is to, instead of sort of falling into this trap of looking at what you're lacking, you start looking at what's already happened. So that word already is massive. I'm always using this word already because we forget how important it is. What have I already achieved? What do I already have a track record in? Where do I already have a positive impact history? Where have I already added meaningful, value to other people, to my organization, or to the decision making within the organization, whatever it might be. But you basically look at what your track record already is. The second thing is you look at your present and you say, okay, in the present moment, where might I be lacking? Let's just be honest. I might be lacking somewhere. Like, what skills do I need to develop? What knowledge do I need to develop? What experience do I not have that would actually really help me to move myself forward towards my own goals, on my own value set? And then the third step is to sort of say, okay, in the future, what is my potential based on me doing the work in the present? So if I develop myself, if I look at how I can build my experience, my expertise, my experience, whatever it might be, how can I make myself even more of an asset in the future? So those 3 steps I think are really valuable, particularly what do I already have, that past step, what's already in my arsenal of tools, of experience that I can bring to the present moment that adds value every day. It will add value to the decision making in my team, to the collaboration, to the sharing of ideas, whatever it might be. And I think when you sort of jump out of that space, you jump out of that concept of lack, and you suddenly realize absolutely everything that you already are offering, you just kind of forgotten about it conveniently. Because it's kind of nice sometimes to wallow in the kind of the negative. People actually do enjoy it sometimes, and to feel that victim space. But you have to jump out of that space and take responsibility for yourself and say, look, that's not serving me. I need to move out of that space.
Absolutely love your 3 pointers, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I know that, for our audience, you have offered a quick click to 17 creative strategies to own your value and steer your career. Can you give us a little bit of what are some of the pointers, or one example of a pointer that one will receive once they subscribe to you?
Yes, I was referring to a kind of a free PDF download that I'd love you guys to access. There's loads of information there. There's actually 17 strategies in there to help you really own your value. And I think it's so important to get into the habit of doing that. And the 9th point on there, tip number 9, is really interesting because it's about doing a kind of a perception analysis, sort of understanding how you're intending, to be perceived by the people around you or stakeholders at work, whether that's, your bosses or whether it's your senior team or whatever it might be. And then asking yourself, are they actually perceiving me how I want them to see me? Because we can kind of fall into this perception trap, an assumption trap, if you like, that people don't rate us, that people don't recognize our value, that people don't value our contribution. And often, our assumptions are wrong. I've realized over time, I've certainly realized that from personal experience. So I think, tip number 9 is a really good one, which is to do that assessment as to, how do people actually perceive me? And ask yourself that honest question. And they might actually perceive you as a massive asset. And you may never have actually thought of it that way. And straight away, you get out of that imposter syndrome mindset because you actually have evidence to support the fact that you're doing a great job already. It's that word again, already.
Love it. And this is the perfect segue to our episode 2. For those who are joining us for the next episode, it is on believing deeply in your professional value and your right to be at the table. Join us shortly.